welcome to the podcast. I am delighted to get you here. I'm very, very excited, actually, in particular after our first chat last week. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I always like to say that I botch every introduction I ever make on the podcast. So now I've stopped doing that. And so instead of me botching, would you mind introducing yourself to us here, please? Like who you are, what you do, and in particular, how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, happy to do it. I'm Lauren Fernandez. I'm the founder and CEO of Full Course. We are the industry's first incubator, accelerator, and investor in early stage restaurant brands. I've been doing this for almost exactly 5 years today, which is exciting. But my journey here is pretty interesting. I started in this space actually as an attorney with a specialization in product commercialization and development. So I did a stint in pharma before I jumped over to food, which was how I landed at Focus Brands and was their general counsel there. Worked with a number of the brands on standing up their licensing programs and ran legal and franchise administration for the company for a little over 3 years before I left and kind of returned to my entrepreneurial roots and became a multi-unit franchisee of the chicken salad chick system, where me and my partners at Origin Development Group owned and operated a total of 11 restaurants with that brand, as well as standing up a catering program and working on delivery testing for them at the time. We exited that system in 2018 as part of a successful exit. I was extremely fortunate to have been with the brand at that time, and it was just the right time to get out of the way so they could move the company's headquarters here to Atlanta. And we sold our units back to the corporate parent in 2018. And in 2019, I took some time off to think about what I needed to do next. And I had learned so much from that experience. I think, like in all things in life, when you have such a profound learning experience, I felt compelled to put a little bit of a parenthesis around it and give myself some space to really think about what I had learned. And some of the things that I wanted to work or tackle were some of the problems that I saw that were inherent in not just that situation, but in several deals that I had seen over my course of time and experience in the industry. And they're really simply put, one, I think capital coming into the restaurant space often misses opportunities to work with emerging brands because a lot of the capital sources prefer brands that are more mature. And that makes sense, right? Because the capital is coming from financing sources that are not necessarily deep restaurant operations experts. The typical PE firm is not going to have a management team very deep in talent that has a ton of operations experience, or even more so experience in how to omni-channel develop brands like we do. I think the second issue is, even if you're a phenomenal operator and you have capital for your growth in your business, understanding the right ways to grow your business, when to add people to the team, and what the right vehicle for growth for you is really hard to figure out. So you can be a phenomenal operator with a great concept, but really make some critical decisions that'll tank the company's future success by not picking the right growth strategy, right? So that's a development expertise. And I think the third thing to understand is we have a massive education gap in this industry. When I think about how hard it was for me to learn the ropes as a restaurateur and that baptism by fire, I was incredibly fortunate. I had a phenomenal training team behind me at Chicken Salad Chick. My FBC, who's now the COO of Full Course, right, taught me everything I needed to know. We had some great talent that were already in place in our restaurants, and I was willing to learn from them. And that still didn't close all the gaps of the things I needed to learn, right? So if we can do anything as an industry to help support the incredible diversity of hourly employees that we have, where a lot of the concentration of women and minorities and immigrants are, we can find the talent from within and nurture it. So when I created Full Course, we really were mindful to make sure that we were solving for all of these issues. Yeah. The company has a private equity arm that invests in early stage businesses with fair and equitable capital, usually as a minority partner on the cap table with growth capital. We support them operationally. We focus on development and omni-channel, company stores, franchising, product development, licensing, and non-traditional deals. But we also have a very deep company history of education, mentorship, and coaching that we support through our nonprofit organization, the Full Course Foundation. So it's a really designed to be a complete solution to meet the needs of these emerging brands and their founders, and help really help the industry countrywide be a better advocate for the next generation of leadership in this industry. That's what we really need, right? I want more representative brands, but what I want even more is more diverse leadership, and that's really where our investment is.
Wow, there's honestly so much to unpack there, and I guess I'm just like a great listener that I remembered everything. So let's go back to the first part that you mentioned there, which is about capital, which I think is a cool kind of place for us to jump off, because that was the first thing you mentioned there as sort of like the inherent problems that exist for, I guess, all all businesses.
It is,
specifically in hospitality, specifically again for up and coming brands. So tell me, when you mention a quote like saying like incoming capital like misses like opportunities for incoming sort of brands. So up and coming brands, there's a misalignment between sort of private equity focus, which presumably looks at larger businesses with a larger footprint because that's typically what they invest in anyway, and there's a background in that. So what you're saying is you've identified a niche almost within the private equity market for hospitality with a focus on up and coming brands, which are, I guess, inherently more risky. Is that why there's less focus on them?
I think that is the knee-jerk reaction and the assumption, because unfortunately there are a lot of statistics out there about the failure rates of restaurants within the first 6 months to a year. But fundamentally, this is actually let's take a step back here. This is a capital issue that affects female and minority-owned businesses actually around the world. And there are studies out of the UK, and they're very similar in the US as well, that female and minority-led businesses receive less than 2% of all capital funding. And I'll just let you sit with that for a minute. That means debt and equity. That's venture capital, angel investors, private equity, it doesn't matter, right? So we have an inherent problem with making sure that we are making investments that are representative of the cultures that we sit in, right? That is just numero uno. The second issue is that I think there's actually some perceived risk that is sometimes attached to these businesses unfairly, when in fact, female-led businesses routinely outperform not only the market, but their male peers, right? So if you look at the data, even companies with more women on their boards outperform, right, similar boards that have an all-male seat on them, right? So I think the data is there, but the problem is the capital is not in the hands of people who are making those decisions that align with the data. And indeed, less than 11% of all venture capital firms are led by a female partner, right? And so it's a trickle down effect, unfortunately, and it's not unique to restaurants. Now, what is unique to restaurants is that I do think that these investments in their early stages require a certain level of industry understanding and operational empathy to understand the true risk that's attached to the business. I don't think that just anyone, least of all an analyst sitting in a seat at an investment bank or perhaps even a private equity firm, can truly judge the risk picture in a restaurant unless they've actually walked a mile in those shoes and can actually visit the restaurant. I strongly object to that. And I think that it's a bit of a bogus premise, because I think one of the things that contributes to higher fail rates for restaurants is the fact that they're undercapitalized. So it's a very kind of like chicken and egg kind of situation. If you're a female or a minority founder and you go to open that restaurant, the overwhelming likelihood is that you have an interest rate on your debt that's exorbitantly high. That you never had a capital partner really to begin with, even if it is presumably debt or equity even. And you're probably scraping together to get that business open. And restaurants fundamentally are a cash flow business. You really have to understand seasonality and patterns and trends and be able to manage to cash flow. And I think, unfortunately, when you are undercapitalized, those hiccups in cash flow can be catastrophic. I think that they disproportionately affect female and minority founded businesses in our industry for obvious reasons. And so what we're here to do is to help close that gap and get in as early as possible, whether that's through our incubator and our nonprofit or through our investment on our, our PE side of our business to help close that gap and make sure that those businesses not only survive, but they thrive. And I don't know another way to do that except for
Yeah.
with the right capital structure, which is why I insisted when we started this company that we raise our own capital, right? There's a
So you
reason.
raised your own debt facility to like basically lend to these up and coming.
Yeah, so I am the general partner of all of the full course funds, and that will always
Yeah.
be the case. We raise our own capital as a private equity firm. Right now, it is strictly equity, although we will have plans for debt in the future. I strongly believe that having a woman and a minority and someone who owned and operated restaurants at the helm of that capital leads us to make extremely and radically different investment decisions, because we are better at assessing risk. And it's not because I'm an attorney. It's because I was an operator, and so is most of my team.
So, I mean, it's incredibly compelling, I have to say. I mean, having worked in alternatives to venture capital before in my own career, for like SaaS subscription businesses, like subscription-based lending, myself as a sort of quote unquote innovation, when I say that in quote unquote. One of the things I think about is like alternative sources of finance then, and you guys are able to provide that. And also me saying you guys in the context of gendered language, what we're talking about.
It's all right. I get it.
I need to be better. When I think about this, like how do you like source? Because one of the things I always found when trying to get businesses to take our money was like the concept of like negative selection, which was like those that are clamoring for your money are probably not the right people you want to give your money to, so to speak. And I was constantly in this battle of trying to, how do I grow this business with also like fending off all the types of businesses that were basically like really looking for us. But like, so I guess like, when it comes to like your type of selection, how do you go about finding or sourcing or engaging with sort of women and minority led restaurant groups? Because to your point, I mean, there's only so many of them, like they're almost few and far between. So it must be harder to spot these sort of diamonds.
Okay, so to answer this question, I'm going to first ask you to picture a day in the life of a restaurant operator. You're probably up before the sun comes up, and you are probably in bed after midnight every single day, and with very little relief. And it is constantly like you're drinking out of a fire hose, but also putting out fires left, right, and sideways. And it's a lot to manage. It's a lot of hats to wear. And so in the 5 years I've been doing this, we've not done any outbound lead generation to generate deal flow for this business and prospective investments. And one of the reasons for that is if you empathetically understand the day in the life of a restaurant operator, that phone call is spam to them. They're not checking their email regularly. They don't have time for pop-up ads on social media. That shiny stuff isn't the kind of person that we're investing in, right? You've got to understand what it is to walk in their shoes. And even if we did that, I would submit to you that it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It rings hollow. And on that premise, here's what we do. We are very clear in our purpose and mission and why this company exists. And one of the reasons for that is not just to make sure that we pull in the right kind of investments, but that we pull in the right kind of investors too. So we are here to create the next generation of restaurant leadership. This is an investment in people first and their brands second. We are leveling the playing field to make sure that all brands get a look at, and you're not just the next great taco or hamburger or pizza concept, which everybody loves, and we know that they love it. But we also want to look at all of the brands that are culturally representative and that have a niche and have a place in this market. 70% of all restaurants in the United States are a single unit location. That is a family-run business, and it is more likely to be led by someone who is a diverse founder, whether they are a veteran, a single parent, a divorced mom or dad, first generation immigrant. It doesn't matter. But they're not getting those same opportunities for growth as some of the mainstream foods that we know everyone loves to eat. And that, I believe, is a mistake. It's not just a mistake for the sake of investing in creating diversity. It's a mistake because that's actually where the consumer palate is headed. And if you are looking at decisions that millennials down to Gen Alpha are making, you will miss the boat if you keep putting your money behind the same old stuff, right? And it's not that we don't talk to brands like that all the time. We do, because some of them have compelling and differentiated reasons for existing. And I love talking to those founders because they are very clear on what they do and usually very good at it, right? But the point here is to level the playing field so that all of those voices can be heard. Now, when you are very clear in why you're doing what you're doing, it tends to be a magnet for people who philosophically agree with you. And one of the most interesting things about this is in the last 3 years that we have been actively vetting investments.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's actually our deal structure that wins, even though I would submit to you that it's better than anything else that's offered out there. I don't think it's even necessarily the team that we've put together to help back these investments with over 200 years of experience and support. And most of us are operators too, by the way, right? So I don't even know that it's that. It's that we have a deep level of empathy and understanding for that founder's journey, a deep level of respect for it. And we honor it in everything that we do. And at the end of the day, I think that's what people hear when they hear us talking about Full Course, when they hear about our purpose, when they hear about our nonprofit, right? They go, oh my God, these people really are walking the walk, right? And then all of a sudden the notion of taking an equity investor in your business is not as scary, right? It's like, oh, this could actually be a good partner for me. And truly, that is how we talk about what we do. You won't hear us say things like we bought a business last year over my cold, dead, lifeless body. We say and use vernacular that honors that relationship. We say our invested partners, nonstop, our invested partners, frippers. We respect them as partners, which I will tell you is not always the easiest way to do things. A lot of private equity folks will tell you like, oh, we just take majority control. And if it's not working, we swap out the founder or we hire a new CEO. And that to me is a failure, right? If you're truly in this to build the next generation of restaurant leadership, that's a critical fail, right? So I can't afford for that. So to, I guess, shortly answer this question and succinctly, like we're looking for philosophical alignment. First and foremost. And if you don't have that, if you're not picking up what we're putting down and you air quotes here, just want the check, not for us. That's not how we work, right? We say thank you and have a nice day because that's not, we're here to partner with you, not hand you a check and let you walk off with it respectfully.
Well, totally.
You know?
And I think it's really cool you framed as like almost like an equity partner in the sense that like, you know, and that I think gives you the sort of aligned incentive, so to speak, that their success is also your success.
Yeah.
But like that kind of gives you the sort of green grass to play within growth strategy as well. I mean, you know, you typically hear, say, like from venture capital that they're like, we have a great team, we've provided all these services, and the founder's like, just write me the check and let me get down to business and we'll live or die with that strategy. But it's like your whole offer is not just the check, you know what I mean? It's like identifying and aligning on a philosophical level, first and foremost, aligning on sort of the business and then being able to provide sort of the operational nous, so to speak, and the capability to help take that company to the next level. So it's almost like, it's like coming in as like, I feel it's almost like you're like a Bill Belichick type character coming in and like corralling these players to like, I don't know how, what a terrible analogy. I'm like, you're like a coach almost. It's like, we can get you to that next level. Like the pitch, like we come in, we can, there's so many unlocks. Like the money is the unlock, obviously, first and foremost. I mean, it keeps the lights on. But like on a practical level, like you want to teach them to fish, another metaphor, you want to teach them to fish. So you have like the growth strategy, which is like, we are experts in what we do. We can help you. Like we can unlock your potential to that founder.
Yeah. And what I will say about that is the proof is in the pudding, right? So number one is when we take equity in these companies, we're never taking more than 49%. But the way that 49 is split on the backside is that typically 15% of it goes into our management company. And that makes sure that our team who's helping you operate the business and focused on the business's growth is truly aligned as a partner and not just the capital providers over in the fund. And so that's a very unique bespoke model that we crafted for this exact situation, because you need to properly incentivize the behaviors that you want to see out of people. And that's true not just for founders, but for our team as well,
Yeah.
right? The second thing I will say about that is lots of investors, and I've seen this a ton of times in incubators and accelerators across venture capital, will talk a big game about what they'll do for you.
Yeah.
And that's true if there's like venture capital involved or an angel or even some private equity, truly. And we see a lot of parroting of that behavior. Like, we have all this experience and we're going to get you all these leases. Whatever the promise is, let me see it in a statement of work, right? Like, we actually put down on paper, here's what we are going to do, here's what you are going to do, and here's how it's going to unfold over the next 5 years, right? I think it's very difficult to create any kind of lasting success for these businesses without a lot of hard work. And you got to be clear about what that work is and who's going to be doing it and what the consequences are. And that is where accountability comes from, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, for us, that's just the right way to do things. So, but I know that that's not normal, right? We built this investment structure to feel like the best parts of venture capital, but also to feel like it's got the power of private equity capital raising behind it. And that was incredibly intentional on my part, right? Because if I, as a founder myself, like, I think often about like, what would I want in this situation?
Yeah.
Right? I would want to be very clear on what they're providing for me outside of just a check, and know that they're going to provide it, and that not only can they provide it, but they've done it before. And to me, that's the power of us investing in the people who help me run this management company that supports our investments. And when you can put all the pieces of the puzzle together like that, I think the crowning glory of this whole thing is it's an investment in the founders. There's a 5-year educational founder curriculum that we custom designed and developed. It's proprietary to Full Course, and it's designed to amplify the founder as a leader in their seat, right? As we're building out a team around them and closing any talent gaps that the company may have, we're actually investing in them. And that's not just lip service. That's something that we have to do every single week, every single quarter, because I'll tell you, yeah, we have a general plan on how we like to do that, but every person is different. People need different coaching in different areas. People learn differently. Some are more auditory, some are more visual, some are more tactile. And we've got to be able to meet them where they're at, which is an investment and a constant reinvestment in them as founders.
It's interesting because we spoke a lot about leadership in our first call, and we were kind of like, oh my God, like, why is there like such a lack of like understanding around like sort of like leadership training in the marketplace in hospitality in general? And it's interesting to hear you talk about that from like an education perspective, because I think you and I are both aligned that a lot of the fundamentals of leadership can actually be kind of boiled down and actually taught to people to like unlock their potential. Like, I mean, I guess like my question to you is like, why do you think the industry has been so slow to pick up on leadership? And let's leave it there just to get your hot take on that.
Wow, that's a loaded question. Here I go. You might as well just have handed me the soapbox and been like, here, get on it.
Great.
Well, no, I really have thought long and hard about this. I don't come from a, very typical restaurant background. Like, I didn't grow up in restaurants as a child. I came to this industry even kind of already well into my career from the land of, pharmaceutical giants. And I've been very fortunate in my lifetime to be exposed to many different industries, even as an attorney, before I came into restaurants. And I was a little shocked that for an industry that is so incredibly diverse in paper on it and its workforce, that at the top we're remarkably one note, and it is incredibly very white and very male. And I think that one of the issues that we have there is we're an industry that loves an on-the-job training. I mean, that is just how we do. And it's not wrong. I mean, one of my most profound moments in my career was I started at Focus Brands, and Russ, the CEO, said to me, you're not touching a single contract or anything for this company in the legal department until you go get full brand training across all of our brands. And so I went through training for every single one of the brands. I mean, it took me like 3-4 weeks or something like that, maybe more, before I actually sat in the seat and started doing my job. But it gave me the context that I needed. It was the beginning, but it gave me some initial context for sure on what I needed to do to learn my job, and got everyone clear that I was there to learn from them. And my job was to know as much as I could about all of those businesses, even operationally, to be a better advisor and mitigator of risk for the company in all of its executions, right? Whatever brand, whatever format, whatever the business venture was. Now, that said, that's a unique situation, right? Where I'm a corporate executive, I'm getting standardized training for a brand, but then I also get to kind of see behind the curtain. But what typically happens in these situations is, your average American, like half of Americans report that their first job is in a restaurant, and most managers, I think it's overwhelmingly, it's like over 60% of them never planned on being a manager. They ended up there almost by attrition. We are notorious as an industry for incredibly high churn and turnover rates. I mean, north of like 150%, and it's been that way for years. And I think what we do is we treat talent like it's disposable, like it's constantly replaceable. And I look at it a little differently. I think, okay, look, we're the third largest employer in the United States. This is now a $1 trillion industry in the US. What if we thought about training and development of people as a way to affect change in lives, period? Bonus points if we can get them to stay in the industry and build a career path for themselves. But the problem that we have is that we don't close that job gap with on-the-job training, because the issue with on-the-job training is that you're only as good as the person above you who's willing to invest in you, and you're limited by what they know. Yeah. Right. And so that's a perpetuation of limited knowledge. And there's an even bigger bias here that no one talks about, which is Latinos are 19% of the US population. We are overrepresented in restaurant wage and hourly positions as 28% of that population. 26% of all hourly wage workers report that their first language is not English. So if your primary language is Spanish, just as an example, how are you getting the mentoring that you need to go from line cook to chef, from chef to manager, and from manager to owner? It just doesn't happen. And that is one of the reasons fundamentally we don't see diversity in leadership at the highest levels in our industry. I think that this universally affects both women and minorities in a way that we just are not pulling up through the ranks very efficiently and effectively the kind of talent that we need to see running our industry. And if we are going to continue to evolve over the next 2 decades, I am treating this in all of our initiatives at Full Course as an urgent and an emergency matter, right?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Is like in your program for like leadership and in your training and your growth strategies, is there an emphasis on over-indexing for minority and women talent to like when I say over-indexing, like a greater emphasis, so to speak, on making sure that talent is given the opportunity to pitch for a promotion or pitch for like career growth in a way that may not be as much of a unlock in other businesses, for example.
Right. So my answer to that is what I consider to be equal opportunity is equal access. And so what many people don't understand is that those opportunities are closed with biases that we don't even realize exist. When training materials are only printed in one language, right? When women are overwhelmingly offered, waitress or waiter jobs or hostess jobs and not actually screened for management, right? It happened to me. My first restaurant job ever, I was actually asked if I could work the host stand. I wasn't asked if I was interested in any other positions, right? Yeah. They took one look at me and they were like, "You're going to stand right there." And I looking back on that, I kind of laugh because at the time I just didn't even know how to advocate for myself. Yeah. Super interesting, right? And I think that what we don't realize is that built into some of the patterns and behaviors we've just sort of handed down for generations in our industry are a lot of barriers to the folks who actually could and should be contributing to our industry as leaders. And I am here just to remove those barriers. Can we just point them out and get them out of the way, right? So while we do focus on a lot of education, mentorship, coaching, and guidance, and support other nonprofits that do as well with a ton of partnerships and collaboration, I'm constantly thinking about, is this process open? Is it truly an equal opportunity to everyone? Where are we not seeing the bias? How could we be more neutral? How can we get the word out so everyone hears it, right? Because sometimes access is just knowledge. The opportunity exists. Right. And I equate this often to, as a woman who raises capital every day for her job for these investments, right? I think about this a lot because many deals happen in rooms where women are not even invited.
Yeah.
And that's an access issue, right? That is not giving me a fair opportunity because I'm not even in that room. I'm not even on that golf course, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's just sometimes pointing out and making people aware that there are sometimes just even access issues. So no, we do not go out and intentionally over-index to create diversity. I'm not out there actively hunting for female-founded businesses, but I am out there being very clear about the fact that we want to provide those kinds of opportunities to those businesses, and we want to make them feel welcome and ensure that they are treated fairly through our own processes and the way we intake for review, the way that we vet investments, and the way that we create opportunities for education and mentorship in the industry.
Yeah, it's a very unique proposition. I mean, it's not when I say unique, I mean, it's a very unique proposition and a very sort of like, why, like the fact that such a proposition exists as like an opportunity in and of itself in 2024 is like so bizarre, and bizarre in like a societal way. You're like, how is this still like a thing? And like, why, when the data is there, that like that, did you say Hispanic or like Latin? Did you say
Latino? They're actually
Latino,
two separate things, but there's a significant amount of overlap.
Yeah, or Latinx, which kind of captures everything, but then people don't like Latinx. Yeah, it's a whole thing. Yeah, I'm Irish.
No comment.
Well, you mentioned, yeah, exactly. You mentioned, I'll cut that. You mentioned like was it 19% of the staff were like.
So we're 19% of the U.S. population as Latinos. However, we're overrepresented in the hourly wage pool, roughly 28%.
Which is like kind of amazing. And then I presume you've also looked into the data of sort of like the leadership, obviously within hospitality, and that number is obviously significantly less. And so,
yeah.
And
well, think about it this way.
Yeah.
If traditionally the way that you get to leadership in any kind of restaurant company is having a lifetime of experience in various slowly laddering up leadership positions, from busboy to head waiter, from head waiter to manager, from manager to area director, and you've worked your way up, and that is historically how we get talent in our industry, then you can very clearly understand why there's not more women at the top. Right? Like it's just kind of, it becomes a little bit more obvious. So you can also understand how someone who doesn't speak English as their first language, I mean, they probably speak English fine, but it's not their first language, isn't going to be one of those people who slowly get selected to work their way up the top. And so, that's a pretty major issue, because we're not nurturing talent in the right ways from the beginning. And so for me, I see every single possible hourly employee that ever sets foot in a restaurant as the beginning of this journey, right? How do you invest in them so when they leave the industry, they're better off for having worked here? But if they stay, that we're constantly pushing them up through those leadership funnels that actually create better diversity and a better pool of talent, right? That's how I think about it, right? And and even more so, think about the age consideration here, right? So in 2037, we will hit a special moment in the United States where there will actually be a wave of deaths as baby boomers age, and there will be more deaths than births. Okay. And
Whoa.
when you can, I know, so wrap your head around this. When you look at the workforce, again, I'm using hourly as a good kind of basis
Yeah.
because I think that's a good starting point for this conversation. But when you look at the restaurant workforce, it is overwhelmingly under the age of 25. It's almost
Yeah.
2/3 of the workforce. So, what a wonderful and fantastic opportunity to coach leadership, to teach personal responsibility and accountability, to teach conflict resolution, to teach personal career advocacy in those ages when they are ripe for that kind of knowledge, and what an enormous impact that could have on future generations of leaders. And that's true regardless of whether or not they stay in our industry. So
Yeah.
while I see this to such an obvious issue, I also want to, I'm a pragmatic optimist. Like I look at this and go, we can solve for this. Come on,
Yeah.
people. Other industries have done this. We can do it too. And let's point to some restaurants that are doing a great job doing it, right? And let's figure out how to make that the new standard, the new norm, and make it impossible for people to say no. Like, can we all just do this together? What an enormous impact we would have, right?
Who is publicly doing it well, or the one that you couldn't say or mention?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the things that brands do well that I think are really exemplary at the training piece start first with being very clear in their purpose and mission. And that is something that's incredibly important to the generations that are coming behind us, right? From millennials all the way down. And I think that regardless of whether or not you believe with that purpose and mission, what's happening is the parents understand the purpose and mission and think that would be a great place for my kid to work. And look, I'm sitting here in Atlanta, so I'm going to pick a hometown example. And I think one of the best examples I can give is Chick-fil-A. Now, you may not believe or align with their purpose and mission, but for generations, that company has been very clear about what they do and why they do it. And their training is par excellence. I mean, there's literally nothing I can say about it except for if you need an example of where to go on what people training looks like, go to Chick-fil-A, right? And they're universally held up. And this is so interesting. Even outside of their category, that company is routinely held up as an example of what treating people right looks like, whether it's their customers or guests, their employees, their managers, their franchisees, et cetera. And that purpose and mission is what helps inform that trading. So to companies, I think that are great at it, I see those two really key elements. One, purpose and mission clearly defined. Two, they live it and it's in everything. It's how they treat everyone. And that is in service to people. And it doesn't matter if they're wearing a name tag or they're making an order. Right? It's just what you do and how you do it. Right. So, I mean, I think we could sit here and do examples all day long, but I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say this is it doesn't have to be a political or religious affiliation. It just needs to be that the company's purpose and mission is clear. And that's something that we do at Full Course too, right? I take lessons from the greats. And I think sometimes we don't look outside our industry enough for those great examples. And we absolutely can, right? And if you're looking for companies that do completely extraordinary customer service, you can find examples across every major category and learn something from that. But for some reason in our industry, we're remarkably insular. And I don't really understand why, truly. And I struggle with that because a lot of the examples I bring, a lot of the reasons that Full Course is structured the way that it is and the problems that we're trying to solve, we use examples from other industries. We don't actually pull from within, because if it hasn't been done from within thus far, what makes you think we're going to be able to do it from within now? Right?
Totally. I mean, I used to be a design consultant, and this was like half my job in the research part of things, which was using analogs to contextualize the story we were trying to explain to a certain client. Like a bank you're like, what do they know about, say, the user experience of a Spotify app? You know what I mean? But it's like, how do you parlay the personalization or the, you know, the way people engage with the app, for example, and how a bank is like supposed to understand? It's like, yeah, it's not just a place to transact money. Do you know what I mean? Like, think of it in a more
Yeah.
elevated way of thinking about what the product is. And I always find that for quite like interesting, but I think that's just the nature of like, I guess like the nature and the value that you offer and the full course offers is like these sort of perspectives that are sort of grounded in sort of the humanity and the reality of the world we live in outside of the four walls of that particular restaurant, and to be able to like bring in perspectives that not necessarily, I guess, like it's funny because I'm curious you're taking this is what I always felt when I was in consulting as well, was like, it's like, God, these people are so smart, but it's like they need to go for a walk. You know what I mean? Like they need to go like on safari and like see how the world lives and kind of bring that back in. Because it's like, how could these people that are like, you know, HBS educated or whichever and working in this job just not see in front like what's staring them in the face in terms of what the consumer wants? You know,
Yeah. And I
or
mean,
like
that's what you're describing is diversity of thought.
yeah,
And sometimes that diversity of thought needs to come from diversity of experience. And, you know, it's interesting because it's a balance there, right? Because on the one hand, I'm saying, look, there's a piece of this where you're never going to be really great at doing anything restaurants if you haven't walked a mile in those shoes, right? And like you and I were making this joke the other day, like I still know where my name tag is. I've put one on in the last 6 months.
I was waiting for
And
you
my
to
non-slip shoes, are still in my car, you know, because that's like, if I need to go get in a kitchen, I'm going to go get in a kitchen. I'm not going to watch someone fail. I'm going to roll up my sleeves and get her done. Like, that's just sort of the attitude. So like on the one hand, you have to be steeped enough and love the industry enough and love the people in it to have that level of, I've walked it, I'm going to talk it with you. And it's like just a profound and deep empathy that coats everything that we do. But on the other hand, I'll tell you, I think what makes us extraordinary as a team is the diversity of experience. Like
totally.
all of us can check that restaurant industry box. We've been there, we've done that, check, 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 check. But what's really cool about us is we have some incredibly diverse experiences on our team. Like really cool work that people have done in different companies, different life experiences. And those ideas are not just welcome, they're called for, right? And I ask these questions often of the team, and I do a lot of why. Okay, like why did we arrive at that conclusion? Where did that idea come from? Tell me more. Have you seen it done better in another industry? I'll just give you like the simplest example ever. We are working on updating like kind of like our investor reporting, like, you know, just like a one pager, like, hey, here's what's going on. We over communicate, like in case you missed it. That's my jam, right? All right. So I'm like, all right, like how, if I'm an investor, like what do I want to see? And I was trying to describe to our CFO, like I wanted this certain bar, like I wanted like 100% looks like this. And I was like trying to describe it to him. I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, Sam, this is that thing in your Apple when it's like, you look at the storage and it tells you where all the storage is. Like, that's what I want. I want that. And he was like, huh? Because he doesn't have an Apple. And I literally screenshot it and I do this and I circle it and I've got like arrows and I sent it to him. And that's what I got, because in my brain, I'm like, I'm pulling examples from everywhere because we want to be better at communicating. And I'm thinking like, who's better at communicating than Apple and the way they design their products? And that's what popped into my head. And so we 100% ripped off what is basically the storage usage bar on an Apple phone.
Hey, genius
as a way of describing where we had allocated funds, you know, in that quarter. And it's just such a stupid but easy example to see why it's important to be willing to reach outside of industry experience. And for an industry that's so huge as an employer, millions and millions of Americans don't just work in restaurants right now, but they've cycled through them at some point in their career as a job, that we are remarkably insular sometimes in how we look for solutions for things. And there is nowhere truer that this happens with technology. And it drives me crazy because we have had a desert of technology in the restaurant industry for decades, while the tech that we need is in adjacent industries like consumer packaged goods and manufacturing. And I'm on that soapbox all the time. Like, we need people in our industry who understand operational context and understand the needs that need to be met, who can go take tech out of adjacent industries that exists already and make it work for restaurants. Because trying to build tech for restaurants, if you've never been in a pair of non-slip shoes, just forget about it. Like, it never works, right? And I think a lot of operators will tell you that it always sounds like a great solution, and then you buy it and then you're like, wah, wah. That didn't work, right? And it's usually because it's not informed by that level of operations understanding that creates that empathy and understanding. But then again, that's what we're talking about. Like, you have to be able to connect those two things together. It's right, leveraging outside innovation, but also having that operational know-how to how to put those two things together.
Well, it's interesting because I remember you saying, like, last week, when you're former CEO of Focus Brands, for example, and you're like, how does this benefit our franchises? That kind of comes to mind here, because when you think about like purchasing software or purchasing products for like the restaurant, I mean, to your point, there's like a graveyard of products out there that like all intentions were positive, all implementation was negative. And it's like, I think about this a lot because you're trying to like design the best operation possible for like the restaurant for people to thrive in. And people can be quite insular in the restaurant in terms of understanding like what they need and how they think they can solve it. And then on the external side of things, it's like people think that they have the solution, but then they've never walked a minute in those shoes, so don't know what it's like to actually implement or actually work in that kind of environment in the first place. And I think about like, the sort of key bono, the Latin phrase there, like who's benefiting and how does this benefit? And I think that's a cool kind of quote just to think about for everybody involved in sort of the space. It's like, like how does this actually benefit people? Like, is it actually, I think I'm just thinking about it in the sense that like, you need really sage leadership to overcome the type of, to overcome the atrophy almost, in the sense of like there's the internal atrophy and a sort of external exuberance that becomes like a type of atrophy, in the sense like the products don't work, or that the people inside don't want to learn or want to solve problems themselves. And so like, does everything really stem, like tying this weird thought in my head, does everything neatly come together as better leadership is a better company in hospitality? Like, if you don't have great leaders, it's just not going to happen for you, whether you have good food, whether you have the technology, whether you have the location.
I would say to you, yes, because those leaders are the ones that are able to create this level of synthesis that we're talking about, where you take the best of that deep historical tradition that exists in restaurants, that deep knowledge, operations experience, and you marry it with where we need to be. And you don't have any fear about pulling in the right solutions and the right people and the right really avant-garde ideas to get us there, right? And I think that takes a certain level of courage, but also a certain level of well-rounded leadership. And what I guess we're all kind of skirting around here is it can't just be someone who drops in from another industry who's an extraordinarily like gifted leader who doesn't have a clue about the industry. And it also can't be someone sometimes who's just been quite insularly nurtured up through the ranks without that kind of, diversity of thought and opinion. And I was talking to somebody earlier this morning about a friend of mine who's a third generation CEO of a family business. And we grew up together. And I worked in that business at corporate when we were in high school and in college as an intern. And I watched his dad, the second generation of leadership, put him through every single department in that business. And then when he was in college, they sent him to go work at another company. And when I asked why, it was about the fact that he needed to have outside ideas, have the courage to bring outside vision in, and see how other companies ran it so that he could help take the company into the future. And this was intentional. It was designed to create that kind of thought. And so I think sometimes what we miss is that there is beauty in outside talent, but there's also beauty in asking our leaders who are baked from within this industry to push themselves to get outside experience, right? To really think about where these solutions lie. Are they coming from within? Are they coming from adjacent industries? And that is all about being a well-rounded leader, right? And that some of that can be coached. Some of that can
Yeah.
be decisions that you make. And there are other companies in other industries that do a phenomenal job of this. Home Depot rotates executives.
Yeah.
UPS rotates executives. I remember when I was a younger lawyer and I was still in-house counsel, I was like, because like I saw them take their lawyers and move them into other positions like operations, like EMEA ops, just gone
Yeah.
for 3 years. And I was like, whoa, like they're investing in her, right? Like they are thinking ahead and investing. And that is what I'm saying. Like we don't do a good enough job of investing in the well-roundedness of our own talent from within. Even when we do cultivate talent from within, it's not diverse enough. It doesn't have enough diverse enough experience, enough thought, right? And those voices matter. Those experiences matter, and they're going to make this industry better, right? It should never be a knock on you as a leader that you
Yeah.
dipped out of the industry for 5 years and went and did something else. That should actually be looked at as a plus, right? I think, right? I love it when we get candidates like that. I'm like, oh, tell me more. What did you learn at that company, right? Like, why did you come back to restaurants, right? Tell me that. Like, and
Yeah.
I get really excited about that because I think the solutions are all around us, all around us. We just need to do a better job of being more inclusive and diversity of people's experiences, where they came from. And I don't just mean like gender, race, ethnicity, immigration. Like that's not it. Like all of that is inherent when you do hire those people because you're getting diverse thought, diverse experience, right? And I think as an industry, we need to be thinking about diversity and inclusion, not on race and ethnicity lines. It's way bigger than that.
Yeah.
It's way bigger than just that. It's really about diversity of thought, opinion, and experience. And that can come from anywhere. And I think that's actually what we need. And there are some glaring places it shows up, and it certainly is in leadership, and it's definitely in technology. And we're getting better. Okay, we're getting better. I'm not here to doom and gloom. Like we're all working
I
towards
think you're
these
incredibly
things.
positive. I think it's the most inspiring episodes I think I've ever had. I mean, for sure. I mean,
well, listen. I one of the things I teach my own children is you never ever complain without a solution. And I, for years, sat around and I watched these things happen and I thought and I listened and I researched and I asked questions. And then I asked some more questions. And then I went and tried some things and those things didn't work. And I said, why did we fail? Let's go try this now. I got a million fail stories that lead us to these types of conclusions. So, it wasn't always the fully baked idea. Let me just put it that way. But when we put Full Course together, literally 5 years ago this week was when I started doing it and workshopping it kind of in stealth mode. What it needed to be was the sum of all of those experiences. And some of them were mine as a woman. Some of them were mine as a first generation Cuban American. Some of them were mine as coming from a different industry and having to learn very quickly the vernacular and the way things worked, right? Like all of those things, like my fails as an operator, like all of that stuff has materialized into what we now feel is a really good solution for our industry. And I'm not even suggesting we're the only one, but it's not enough just to stand up and say, we need to be more diverse. Show me how we do that. And that's why we share this playbook in our nonprofit. It's not enough for me that we built it out for our own clients and investments. The next level was, let's show everyone else how to do this now too. And that's why, even though we exist to make investments and we are here to cultivate leaders, we also do coaching and consulting and nonprofit work in this space, because if you are clear on what your mission is, then you should go and walk it. And we believe that. And you know what? I am so proud of our team because they believe it. And our investors believe it too, and support what we're doing in ways that are way bigger than just writing checks. And that is the power of being incredibly clear on why you're doing what you're doing and having solutions to go with it. It's not just enough to say diversity, yay, right? Show me how you do it.
I am like so impressed. It's unbelievable. I think this has been like honestly one of the best. I'm walking out of here and I'm like, all right, we gotta really focus. Let's get that mission back up on the board. This is unbelievable. No, I mean honestly, like Lauren, like thank you so much. I mean, this has been just so incredibly insightful. Like from discussing capital, access to opportunity all the way to here. I'm like just so grateful for you to come on and speak this. I'm honestly like I'm jazzed. Consider me jazzed. Like, you've been phenomenal. I mean, this has been
Thank you.
one of the
Gosh,
most informative, probably the most informative episode I've done over the entire podcast. And I've done over 100 now. So, it's a lot. So let me tell you, you're getting a gold medal out of this one today.
Oh, dude, thanks. Well, listen, I want to say thank you for the opportunity to be here and for your willingness to just touch on a lot of topics that, frankly, a lot of people don't want to talk about and don't want to address. And that takes a lot of courage and humility and willingness and openness. And I appreciate it. I do. Every time we get an opportunity.
Would say that about me.
Well, humility, I just did. Sure. I just did. But no, I appreciate it because listen, in 5 years we've been doing this. We're a scrappy small company. This entire venture has been bootstrapped by yours truly and loving support from friends, family, and supporters that's far beyond financial, right? And so whenever we have an opportunity to get out there and talk about what we're doing and why it's important, you help us create momentum and deepen our network of people who care. And the success that we have been able to realize over this last 5 years is because it has had an enormous amount of support from the industry. And the press that we've gotten, the recognition, and is great. But what's more important to me is that we create allies and networks and referrals and support for these types of initiatives. And that to me is what success looks like, because I have every confidence that this will continue to crush it, that what we've built is just getting started. We have big goals for this. And I'm not worried about that. But what I focus on every day is, are we connecting with people? Are the people we're here to serve hearing what we have to say? Are they aware that they have access to help and that we're here to help them? That's what we're here for. And so when you give us a microphone, you're doing a huge service to our cause. And I appreciate you for that. Thanks.
Well, you're more than welcome. And I'm excited to see the journey and to stay in touch with you.
Stay tuned.